Very good evening to you and welcome to Breaking Today. My name is Frederick Muitidiri. My sign language interpreter tonight is Michael Maithia, and Happy New Year. These are the highlights. Curtains fall on former Chief Justice David Maraga as he exits the judiciary. ODM leader Raila Odinga has backed President Uhuru Kenyatta's sentiments on having a different community for the top seat. And Senate Majority Whip Irungo KANGATA has come out to defend his controversial letter to the president, saying and insisting he drafted the said letter. Welcome to the broadcast. You can talk to me via SMS line, that is on 111 444 111. How are you going to remember David Maraga? Now, starting us off, David Kenani Maraga has officially exited from the judiciary on attaining the mandatory retirement age of 70. In his final speech as Chief Justice, Maraga has urged the judicial officers to stand firm and to allow to do always the right thing in the current rising political temperatures in the country. Majibu Kitsao witnessed the handing over the ceremony at the Supreme Court and prepared the following story.
Before that, he'll be officially derobed.
The immediate former Chief Justice David Maraga has officially handed over the instruments of power to his Deputy Justice Philomena Mwilu, who will hold the position in an acting capacity until the next appointment of Maraga's replacement. Maraga handed over to Mwilu during a special sitting held by the Supreme Court of Kenya in his honor. In an emotional message, Maraga expressed his sincere gratitude to all judges and all judicial staff for their unwavering support during his tenure.
Thank you to my dear colleagues, starting with the Deputy Chief Justice, my brothers and sister judges, with whom I had the distinct pleasure of serving in the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and the High Court.
In his final statements, the CJ has asked members of the judiciary to be very bold and brave at a time the country has started witnessing increased political tensions, further urging the judges to help maintain and preserve judicial independence as he did.
I'm sure you live in this country and you have seen the drums of political war being beaten already. My colleagues, if you waver and do the wrong thing, and this country descends into chaos, God will never forgive you.
The acting CJ Philomena Mwilu attributed many of the judicial developments to Maraga, citing his leadership shaped the judiciary and how they delivered their services to the people of Kenya.
Over the past 4 years, it has been my honor and privilege to serve as your deputy and vice president. I have gained immensely from working with you, learning from your mentorship, encouragement in moments of weakness, and your advice.
A special thanks goes to my dear wife and the children behind me here. As well as my extended family. Throughout the time, the time I served, my dear wife and children and my family and friends, you bore the brunt of the attacks and the threats against me.
Maraga will be remembered for his tough and bold decisions on matters judicial independence, judges' appointments, and funding of the judiciary. One of the most visible signs that power has changed hands at the judiciary has happened today, with the outgoing Chief Justice David Maraga being deprived of his official car. It is now clear that things have changed at the top. Majibu Kitsao for SHTV.
All right, thank you, Majibu Kitsao, for that piece. Now, how are you going to remember the outgoing Chief Justice David Maraga. How will you remember the outgoing Chief Justice David Maraga? SMS us on 111 444 111. You can tweet us at Switch TV Kenya, at Fred Mwitiriri. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, and on our YouTube channel, that is Switch TV News. Now, moving on. The Law Society of Kenya President Nelson HAVI has challenged President Uhuru Kenyatta to appoint 40 judges in the judiciary. HAVI, who was speaking today at the Supreme Court buildings as he bid farewell to immediate former Chief Justice David Maraga, has said that is the only way and the only legacy the president can leave, and not the BBI politics.
To the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, that the only way you can leave a good legacy is not about the big four agenda. It's nonsense. It's not about BBI. It's nonsense. Leave a legacy founded upon the rule of law and constitutionalism. Appoint and have those 40 judges sworn in. Enable the judiciary to function optimally. Because those who have read history understand that the greatest leaders are the ones who have provided an environment that protects the weak. The executive and parliament will not take undue advantage of the transition period and continue the machination that they have been up to for the last 4 years. Because there is talk in Kenya that we need to look towards developing the nation. These fights are unnecessary. And 2 months ago, the Chief Justice himself said, if he wronged the president, he apologizes for it. And if he has been wronged, then he forgives those who have wronged him.
From the courts now on to matters politics, where ODM leader Raila Odinga has backed President Uhuru Kenyatta's call to have another community produce the country's next head of state. The former Prime Minister was speaking at his Karen residence after meeting Team One Kenya, led by former Mungiki leader Maina Jenga, where he termed the issue of rotational presidency sensitive in Kenya, but as practice that is being done by other countries. On Saturday, President Uhuru Kenyatta hinted that he might not back his deputy William Ruto for the presidency in 2022 because of his tribe.
We were there. Yugi Akongo professor were there. Utino Mako Nyango, Kaimoji Wachira, Professor Katana Mkangi, our former Chief Justice William Mutunga. All of these people who suffered seriously. And when we were at the height of...
Now, our Muslim lobby group, Kenya Muslim Advisory Council, KEMNAC, has backed President Uhuru's statement on 2022 political leadership. The outfit has said political ethnicity experienced after every 5 years will be solved through the BBI and rotational of presidency from one community to the other.
Mheshimiwa Uhuru Kenyatta akisema enough is enough, wacha jamii nyingine nayo itawale. Liko wapi kosa la Uhuru jamani hapa? Kuna makosa hapa? Hamna. Ni ukabila huu? Hakuna. Rais Uhuru Kenyatta hajawa mkabila.
Huu ni ukweli mtupu, kwa sababu hata wenzetu kule Amerika walimtoa mtoto kutoka Kenya ndio akawa rais kule. Kwa nini sisi hapa tufikiri jambo kama hilo? Rais ni mkweli, na kusema kweli kule alhaqu wala ukana murra. Amesema jambo la wazi kabisa.
Kwa Tanga akachukua jina lake zuri la dokta akalieka kando, anasema mimi Tanga. Sasa ndugu yangu atakutangisha Wakenya wanachoka kutanga bwana. Na hapa panjengwa darajani ndugu yangu, usipaende na kutanga. Utaanguka kwenye maji pamoja na wafasi wako.
Na mtanga tusitangatange. Senate Majority Whip Irungu Kangata has come out to defend his controversial letter to the president, insisting that he indeed drafted the letter. Speaking for the first time since the explosive letter to President Uhuru Kenyatta, Kangata has said that he has zero regrets for reporting the truth as per the wishes of his constituents, but he regrets the leakage of the letter. In the letter, Kangata said the Mount Kenya region will not support the BBI report in its current form.
According to Kangata, he indeed authored the letter dated 30th December 2020, terming it authentic, but he distanced himself from the letter that was authored on 4th January 2021.
So the first question is, did I order the letter dated 30th of December 2020? Yes, and indeed I did order that letter. And the second question is, did I order the letter dated 4th of January 2021? No, I did not order that letter. We all know that these days there do exist various technological platforms that people can use to maneuver and make fake and fraudulent letters. And therefore, the one of 4th of January is not actually my letter.
Relaying his regrets, KANGATA, however, believes that the discussion arising out of that letter is a clear indicator that there are people who are not candid enough on matters BBI.
I have expressed my regret for the leakage of that letter, but notwithstanding that fact, the discussion arising out of that letter appears to vindicate my strong view that there are people who are not being candid and frank on matters BBI, particularly the level of approval rating of BBI in our region of Mount Kenya.
KANGATA further said that him writing the letter was not a political move, rather he was forced into telling the truth by a meeting he held in MARAGA over the new year, where farmers, teachers, lawyers and border youth told him in unequivocal terms that the Building Bridges initiative was facing major turbulence in the area.
There was no other political player who was involved in the drafting and making of that letter. It was my own honest and candid assessment of BBI in our region.
Last week, 10 county bosses from Central Kenya region differed with KANGATA and dismissed his claims terming them untrue. Emmanuel Terer, Switch TV.
The tug of words and flexing of muscles between the clinical officers and the governors continues. The Kenya Union of Clinical Officers, KUCO, today took to the governor's offices to rebuke their actions of not honoring the return to work formula that was signed between the health workers, the national government and the county government. KUCO Secretary General George Gibore spoke to Switch TV and he had this to say.
A virus that shook the world by sending the shockwaves in the health sector after the first case of coronavirus in the country in March has caused a drift between the government and the Kenyan nurses. The medics who downed their tools last December and later agreeing on going back to work during the new year have accused the government of neglect after not providing enough protective gears to the frontline workers and lack of medical covers, among other grievances. Speaking to Switch TV, George Gibore says the Council of County Governors backed down on the return to work formula with allegations of not being consulted in the agreement process.
When we signed this return to work on 1st January 2021, the Council of Governors leadership, the Chair Council of Governors, was consulted and promised that they were to assent to this document on 4th January. Unfortunately, what came out is that they only changed and they gave a different letter to the CS Health, Honorable Mutahi Kagwe, where they were dissenting themselves on this document and trying to disassociate by saying they were never consulted.
The Kenya Union of Clinical Officers has termed the lack of respect by the county governments and the national government as discriminatory.
Signed a document similar with the KEMBDU at a central place. And the issues on the return to work by the KEMBDU is homogeneous. They are similar to what the clinical officer have been able to agree. Then why the change of heart for clinical officer? This is what we call discrimination, and we cannot accept this under the current constitution and of course the current spirit of democracy.
Although the doctors are back to work, a lack of clinical officers at the hospitals means that the health crisis in Kenya continues. Reporting for Switch TV, my name is Joanne Kutuny.
Thank you, Joanne. And now to a sad story where 22-year-old Lawrence Warunge, a prime suspect in the KIAMBU killings that claimed 4 family members and their worker, has been arraigned in court alongside his girlfriend Sarah Modoni. Lawrence Warunge, who was presented in court today in KIAMBU, where investigators were given 2 weeks to probe the matter. Police will use the time to do a DNA tests and post-mortem as part of their investigations. During the period, Warunge will also undergo a mental assessment. The suspect was arraigned alongside his girlfriend, and the two will remain in custody for the next 2 weeks until investigations are completed.
Have you heard? You have understood and you have no comment. So that means that you have no objection to that application. In Kiswahili? Formation on, let's count 14 days from today. 14 days from today will be 14 days. Today is 11 and 14.
You have not completed the recovery of exhibits, Your Honor. You have not collected their DNA samples, Your Honor. We have also not conducted their mental assessment, Your Honor. And we are still retracing some witnesses, Your Honor.
Such a sad story. You know, initially they thought that 5 team member attacked the family, but now it was just one man. How sad. Ugunja Member of Parliament OPIYO WANDAYI says the government should come up with an official policy guideline on the payment of school fees in learning institutions in the wake of COVID-19. He says the government should, through the Ministry of Education, issue directives to head of institutions not to send away students who fail to pay the required fees without an official policy document.
They are now back in school. It is encouraging that the government, through the Cabinet Secretary for Education, is advising school administrators not to send children back home for school fees and to allow children to learn in school, even if they are unable to pay school fees. That is well and good, and we support it fully. But I don't think the government can just stop at that, knowing fully well that these schools need money to run.
All right, we are taking a short break, but before you do that, I asked you earlier on, how will you remember the outgoing Chief Justice David Maraga? How will you remember the outgoing Chief Justice David Maraga? SMS us on 111 444 111. We are on Twitter at Switch TV Kenya and at Fred Mutiriri. Also, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube at Switch TV News. We take a short break. We'll be back with more in a short while. And welcome back. Now we go to international news, where it is the world's most pressing scientific puzzle. But experts warn there may never be a conclusive answer over the source of the coronavirus after an investigative effort marked from the start by disarray, Chinese secrecy and international recall. January 11 marks the anniversary of China confirming its first death from COVID-19, a 61-year-old man who was a regular at now notorious Wuhan wet market.
Nearly 2 million deaths later, the pandemic is out of control across much of the world, leaving tens of millions ill, a plagiarized global economy and recriminations flying between nations. Yet China, which has broadly controlled the pandemic on its soil, is still frustrating independent attempts to trace the virus origins and the central question of how it jumped from animals to humans. There is little dispute that the virus, which brought the world to its knees, sparked its first known outbreak in late 2019 at a wet market in the central Chinese city of Wuhan, where wildlife was sold as food, and the pathogen is believed to have originated from bird species. But the trail ends there, clouded by a mishmash of subsequent clues that suggest its origins may predate Wuhan, as well as theories amplified by US President Donald Trump that it leaked from a Wuhan lab. Establishing the source is vital for extinguishing future outbreaks early, leading virologists say, providing clues that can guide policy decisions on whether to cull animal populations, quarantine affected persons, or limit wildlife hunting and other human-animal interactions. Wuhan authorities initially tried to cover up the outbreak and later spent precious weeks denying human-to-human transmission. Early on, Chinese officials declared flatly that the outbreak began at Wuhan seafood market in Wuhan. But Chinese data in January 2020 showed that several of the first cases had no known links to the now shuttered market, suggesting a source elsewhere. China's story morphed again last March when top Chinese disease control official Gao Fu said the market was not the source, but a victim, a place where the pathogen was merely amplified. What the scientists will be allowed to see or may expect to find a year on is also in doubt. Experts say authorities may have destroyed or scrapped away crucial evidence in a panicked initial response. The reasons for China's secrecy are unclear, but the ruling Communist Party has a history of suppressing politically damaging information. Whistleblowers and citizen reporters who shared details of the terrifying early weeks of the virus on the internet have since been muzzled or jailed. Daniel Kareki, Switch TV.
Thank you, Daniel. Now, global leaders will try to reignite international environmental diplomacy on Monday with a biodiversity summit that launches a critical year for efforts to stem the devastating effects of global warming and species loss. The One Planet Summit, a largely virtual event hosted by France in partnership with the United Nations and the World Bank, will include French President Emmanuel Macron, UN Chief Antonio Guterres, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and EU Chief, among others.
En 15 ans, l'initiative de la Grande Muraille Verte a connu des...
In 15 years, the Great Green Wall has had its ups and downs very clearly, and also take our share of responsibility for the downs. No doubt, we have not put enough money, political commitment collectively, but I think that today it is part of the responses to our region and more broadly for the African continent. And our objective throughout the day is this battle for biodiversity, but also our efforts against global warming.
Contribution dans la lutte contre le réchauffement.
And from the business desk, lockdowns and curfew hours minimize the business activities in the country, hence crippling the economy, and the tax relief announced in April 2020 was enacted to help reduce the economic shocks. However, at the start of the year, the government cut off the tax relief, and economists think the Treasury should have given the tax relief an extension, despite wanting to increase the revenue collected.
Economists think reverting the tax relief from 14% back to the initial 16% by the government is premature and will affect the rate of spending.
It was to cushion people against the negative economic effects of COVID. But now we are pulling it out early. And I think the reason they are pulling it out early is because the collection side is already starting to suffer. But given the informality of our economy, I think we need to tax our mind a bit more as to how do we really get to help that guy who is below radar, but drives the economy anyway.
There are fears that the action to return the taxes that initially meant to cushion Kenyans against the pandemic will slow down the economic recovery process that is expected to take place in 2021. In most cases, high taxes mean rise in food and household item prices, but will this cause inflation?
The banks would rather lend somebody else. And that's why you see the more, if you look at the asset allocation, most of the assets now that they're creating out of the deposits is to treasury bills and treasury bonds. So just trying to play it safe. So to them, they still hold the view that these are risky assets. But when banks behave that way, they're not helping the economy because really there's no production in that. So what we want is that money that has come from depositors to go to the SMEs and grow them. And that's the only way we come out of this, because when the SMEs grow, they employ more people, we stimulate our demand, the supply comes, and we start getting out of this hole. To absorb higher prices is very low. Our inflation has remained good. It's in the 5 percentage point region, so it's okay, because I know as a policy, it's 5% plus or minus 2.5%. So for as long as we're in that band, there's no cause for alarm. And we've been there for quite a while. So we've not touched 7.5, we've not touched 2.5. If we touch any of those, then there'll be intervention. But before that, it's allowed to play. Because don't forget, a little bit of inflation is important for business to grow, because you also want higher prices. So, but the question, what you don't want is don't want them too high. So that's why they define it as, or here for Kenya, for our economy, 5% plus or minus 2.5%. So we need cause inflation, yes. But inflation a bad thing? Not necessarily, for as long as it's contained within certain bands, which as a monetary policy, it's being contained. So overall, let's just think through that, what is the capacity of how much taxation can this economy take? And those calculations can be done. And then we work backwards. Yes, once we establish this is the maximum this economy can take, they work backwards with taxes that impact both the producer and the consumer as much as possible in equal share. Somebody goes into serious business.
Abraham Uthogo, an economist, recommends that banks should take risks and allow Kenyans to access loans to revive their businesses. Introduction of the taxes in the midst of crisis means that yes, the government wants to cushion its people, but it also has to cushion itself. Reporting for Switch TV, my name is Joan Kutunyi.
Thank you, John Kutunyi. The Party Club of International Creditors said on Monday it had accepted a request from Kenya for debt servicing suspension from January to the end of June. The Party Club said in a statement on its website that Kenya is committed to devote the resources freed by this initiative to increase spending in order to mitigate the health, economic and social impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya is also committed to seeking from other bilateral official creditors debt servicing treatment in line with the agreed terms of the Debt Service Suspension Initiative of the G20 group of rich nations and big emerging powers. The creditors added in their statement, Kenya changed its mind about G20 coronavirus debt relief initiative after declining to join earlier in 2020, and Finance Minister Uhuru said in November that it was planning to defer around $690 million in debt payments.
Excellency, the President of the French Republic.
Well, that's the end of business news. Back to you, Frederick Mutiriri.
All right, it's time for sports before Monday Sports Center with Tony Kwalanda coming up in a short while. English Premier League side West Ham United visits Stockport at Edgley Park for a tussle to book a slot in the fourth round of the FA Cup competition. The Hammers sit 10th in the Premier League, 86 places above their host. The last FA Cup encounter between Stockport and West Ham was back in January 1958 in the fourth round, with the Hammers winning 3-2 at Upton Park. Elsewhere, Carlos Vinicius scored a hat-trick when Tottenham thrashed Marine 5-0 to qualify for the fourth round of FA Cup competition. Vinicius scored his treble in the first half, while the exquisite free kick by fellow Brazilian Lucas Moura before the break and a